Hey everyone, Ryan here, or as the kids like to call me, S Reaper G. No? Okay, fine. Bleak Faith Forsaken, an upcoming RPG by indie developer ArchAngel Studios, a game that I discovered myself. No, I didn't, but I have seen it online for some time, and recently I started following it. Something that I noted in the last video where I spoke about this game is that it just looks better and better every single time they show new gameplay for it. Just the other day, Bleak Faith got a new vertical slice of some new gameplay, and I wanted to break it down a bit, at least as far as the gameplay goes. Note that they stripped out any story content to avoid spoilers, and the full feature set promise is not yet available as the game is still in development. Either way, let's get right into it. Also, there's no good way to interject with this, but please subscribe. It helps me continue to deliver content just like this. Okay, let's do it. First thing we see is the player character in some kind of sewer-like system. They begin to head down a corridor of some sort. We see a creature, and the protagonist brandishes their weapon as it approaches them rather aggressively. Now, rather than take this creature head on, the player jumps into the water below, perhaps showing off that swimming will be an available action the player can take when traversing environments. So we're in the water now, and one thing I will definitely note, and again, this game is still in development, so I do understand if it's not finished yet, the water looks very, very clear, and by clear, I mean almost like clean. It's not a major thing, and having it be clear underwater can help with vision and you seeing where you're going even if it's a bit darker, but I would like to see it be a bit murkier, maybe just add a bit of dirt or fog to it. I think it would add some atmosphere and realism to it. Right now, it looks like the underwater segments are a bit darker, so those look pretty good. It's more just the brief moments where the player is underwater that it looks like it's a little too clean for me, but maybe I'm just going crazy here. I think also because if you look at it the same way I am, it looks like when the player is above water, it can almost feel like they're kind of like floating if the camera is at a certain angle. That is a nitpick for sure, because otherwise the animations here do look great, and so does the underwater segment in general. The underwater section does go on for a bit, and you can see the oxygen bar here and the player character stopping at various intervals to get some air and refill the bar. They finally get out of the water and start climbing, and I really do like the animations here. Something I'm going to say multiple times throughout this video is that I really like the animation. It looks rough, but in a realistic way. The character seemingly struggles to jump and fall from spot to spot. I'm excited to see more of that and even experience more of that when I can play it myself. Next, we're going to go through some grass here, and seemingly this means that there will be some level of stealth, even at its most basic at play. He runs back after being discovered by an enemy and then gets in a more offensive position. The player gets a few hits in, and I'm going to point out something they already have fixed, or they said that they have fixed and posted about it. They posted a follow-up video to show it off, but you see in there those hits that there's very little impact on the enemy. A lot of people pointed this out to them, and the reason it's important that they address it is because if enemies don't react to your hits, at least some of the time, not only will combat feel floaty, it's also likely going to cause issues in harder battles when you're trying to dispatch enemies. And look, you always need that impact, or in some cases a knockback, not to just yourself, but your enemies. It wouldn't be fair that your enemies can knock you back or stun you, but you could never do the same. So as I mentioned, the developer took note of this complaint, or this criticism rather quickly, and tweaked the gameplay themselves and released a follow-up video to show how it's already been tweaked from fan feedback. And I'll let that speak for itself. Either way, that's awesome to see. I always think it's a balancing act for developers between wanting to execute their own vision while also listening to player and fan feedback. In this case, clearly they agreed with everyone about the lack of weight and impact on hits, so the quick turnaround is awesome to see, and props to them for that. Again, as I said, every time these guys show a new video for the game, it looks better, and this small update is no different. Let's get back to our original vertical slice here. The protagonist does a really cool finishing attack that I think has a nice flair to it without being too over the top. The player encounters another enemy and makes quick work of them. And something you no doubt notice if you look closely is the protagonist seems to do more dodging than any blocking. I chalk this up to the weapon set that they have, which is kind of like a scythe mixed with a stop sign or fence post. At least that's what it looked like when I paused it and took a closer look at it. So they fight a few more enemies, and damn, I gotta say, these guys do a lot of damage to the player, to say the least here. Otherwise, they don't look too difficult to take down, and it seems if you're just patient enough, most of the enemies will go down pretty easily. I also noticed a very subtle shakiness to the camera at times when the player is walking or running forward. but that could just be the specific area the character's in, or I could be going insane. Both are possible. My best guess to the area that the player is in is some kind of broken down city, and we are obviously traveling across some seemingly unstable ground high above, and the passage of time obviously signified by the fact that there's moss and vegetation growing on these objects. A lot of it is obscured by fog and darkness, so really I could be totally wrong, but if I am just guessing, I could see that as a possibility. You'll see the player here perform a stealth kill, and that confirms that there are some light stealth elements in the game. I don't remember if they said much about the stealth in the game except to say that you can do some small actions here and there, but even so, it does look pretty solid to me. Off in the distance here, you see a structure almost suspended in air and moving, adding to that the dark fantasy / cyberpunk aesthetic they are kind of going for here. Another theory I have could be this omni structure as described in the game's little write-up online, that the player, as they say, is traveling through or at least towards it. Either way, you don't name your game Bleak Faith Forsaken if you're trying to sell Girl Scout cookies. Or maybe you do, I don't know what kind of Girl Scout cookies you're selling. I want to pause here for a second and talk about the silence you're hearing. Now, soundtracks, of course, are super important to games, as is audio or sound in general, but something the Souls series always did well was the lack of sound in a lot of the gameplay, which really adds to the game's atmosphere. I get that from Bleak Faith Forsaken as well, if you listen closely to the player's footsteps and the screams off in the distance. If there was music here, it could of course contribute to the atmosphere, but the more interesting proposition is that if the atmosphere can be created by an almost muted audio track with very few sounds coming through. I think that's a running motif of an older style of horror, right? Well, what you show is almost never as scary as what you don't show because it lets your imagination fill in the gaps. Good stuff. And here we are at the demo's climax at a boss battle. The music swells up, and a small detail I really do like is the pixelated digital-like obfuscation of the exit. It speaks of artificial hindrance in creation or intelligence. I mean, the boss's name is Silicon Visage or Visage, so I don't know how to pronounce that, but if that doesn't at least give us a hint of the game's story or themes, then I don't know what will. Quickly, I suppose I should mention some of the HUD elements here. Obviously, in the top left corner, the stamina and health bars. In the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, there's a hotkey of sorts for different abilities, and you'll see the player use one of them in a bit. If we look back at a few different screens, you'll see a few squares pop up next to the hotkey, and I think that's probably just what abilities are being used or in cooldown. Right below it is the FX bar, or effectively the magic bar. I think this should just be put up next to the stamina and health bars. It can unintentionally confuse the player, I think, if they have to look in multiple different sections for all the information on what's going on with their character and gameplay. Also in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, I think it's just simply another hotkey thing, which is not clear if it's attached to the other one or just a separate one. Again, as with the FX bar, I think condensing some of these elements would help not unintentionally cause some confusion for the player in gameplay. And the final thing I should mention that pops up here, I guess, is the Radial Menu. Anything you can't fit in your little hot button menu should be here to click, or at least some of the items, I imagine. Either way, I wanted to quickly just mention some of those items before we continued. We see the player use some kind of magic ability that does some decent damage. It almost looks like a bunch of black magic just falling down upon them or raining down hell upon the boss, and then the boss uses a red beam to attack. It can also slam its tail around. I would say they do have some work to do on the boss's animation here, but it's coming along pretty well. It's really only a few parts where it does look a little stiff in movement, but everything else looks really cool and really smooth. At this point, the boss does this classic boss move where it jumps out of view and sends a few little dudes to come and try and end you. Might be an engine thing or an optimization thing, but I would like them to add more of these creatures being sent down to kill you and have the boss maybe attack a little more frequently from above. As I said before, everything looks as if you're just simply patient and not too risky. You can manage pretty well, so I think if you have a few more enemies come in at a time and maybe have the boss attack a little more frequently, then you have a rough situation that is hard to manage and will add to that atmosphere and that sense of I need to get out of the situation really quickly, holy shit. Also, I need my guy to heal up here because they are giving me anxiety, unless they already used all their healing up, in which case I feel for you, bro. And finally, the boss swoops down and case in point kills the player, and that's the end of the demo. Again, this is of course just my opinion, but Bleak Faith Forsaken looks better better every time it is shown, and to me, at least it provides a clear example of indie devs punching above their weight. I don't know how far it is along, but I am incredibly excited to see it progress further and further. The animations look solid, gameplay looks good and fun, and again, they already fixed the biggest complaint with the gameplay so far. If you're looking for an RPG that is something familiar but very different all the same, I would definitely check out Bleak Faith Forsaken. There's enough gameplay on their YouTube channel that you can decide if it's something that's going to interest you or not. As I said, they show gameplay every once in a while, and every time it looks better, and despite my nitpicks here and there, it all looks to be shaping up pretty well. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of Bleak Faith's new vertical slice, and I of course want to ask you, what do you think? Let me know below. Oh, and of course, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't, and of course subscribe if you like this content and want to see more like it. I mainly cover RPG games, but I talk about others as well, and we also occasionally discuss industry news and trends, but until my next video, I will talk to you all soon. Thanks for watching, and I love you all. Maybe.